Welcome back to the Arrive U.S. Immigration Podcast for Canadians, where we break down U.S. immigration for Canadians and focus on Canadians that want to work and live in the United States and address your questions about TN visa and other work visas and how to live and work in the United States as Canadians, and helping you understand how immigration works in the real world and how it's applied on a daily basis with CBP, with the consulates, and with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Today, we are going to not only have some live callers again, like we did in our last episode, but we're also going to address some questions that we've been receiving via telephone, as well as through with our clients that they have about U.S. immigration, as well as some email questions that we've received over the past week. So today we're going to begin with two questions that we've received on a regular basis recently. The first question is, what is the risk of traveling to the United States as a Canadian? We're getting this question quite frequently because of what people are seeing in the news and what's being portrayed in the media really is what's causing the concern. And is there a cause of concern for Canadians to travel to the United States? And what is the risk of them traveling to the United States in general? If you're a Canadian and you go to the Canadian government website, actually, and you look up, they have a travel advisory on countries that they give caution for you to travel, and they have a color scheme. It's like yellow, orange, green, red. And the United States is green. And there is no travel advisory for Canadians coming to the United States. And it's been that way for a long time. The United States is still a safe place for Canadians to travel as visitors, to come to live, to work, whatever it might be, as long as you are being forthright at the border, as long as you have the proper documentation, as long as you are doing what you're supposed to be doing, either as a visitor or working, and you're not committing fraud, you're not trafficking in drugs or committing other crimes, uh, and you have nothing to hide, then as a Canadian, you should feel the liberty to travel to the United States with your proper documentation, just as you've always been able to travel. We've had employees commuting daily back and forth from Canada for years now with no issue in the past or currently. Now, can you face some maybe increased scrutiny when you're traveling to the United States? Sure. But you always face that when you're dealing with CBP. They can choose to, let you in with a smile and a wave, or they can let you in after a line of questioning. It's their discretion, and your travel history and other way you answer questions and all of that goes into play as you're seeking entry to the United States. But in general, as a Canadian, there is no cause for concern traveling to the United States, no more than you've ever had. The other question is along those same lines. What's the risk of leaving the United States and work and returning to the United States if you're here in the United States on a valid work visa, such as a TN visa, an E visa, L1, H1B, or whatever it might be? What is the risk if I leave the country? Am I coming back in? Well, it's the same risk as if you're traveling as a visitor from Canada. If you have a valid visa, you are working under that visa legally, and you are returning to your employment in the United States, then you shouldn't have any cause for concern while traveling outside of the United States. If your visa is valid, you're continuing to work, then you should be allowed to re-enter the United States. Now, again, there's increased scrutiny. So be prepared to prove that you're still working. Be prepared to answer questions about what you're doing in your job. If they question your visa and whether or not you're working under the proper visa, they can ask those questions. Anytime you exit the United States and re-enter, you open yourself up to reinspection before you return to the United States. That is standard procedure. So there is nothing new as far as that goes. I would say they are applying, again, more scrutiny. So can they question and make sure you're on the right visa and you're doing what you're supposed to? Yes, they can. And they've always been able to do that. But I would say that that has gone up a notch under this current administration. But in general, Canadian traveling to the US as a visitor, whatever your purpose is, as long as it's legal, you should feel free to do that. If you are in the United States working and need to leave and come back, and you have a valid visa that allows you to do that, then you should feel free to travel as well. Now, we have received multiple email questions, and we receive multiple email questions every day. And we've picked a couple of those to answer for you today that address some questions that a lot of you have about U.S. immigration. The first question that we have that we're going to discuss today, here it is, number one. I had a green card through marriage back in the early 2000s, but have since divorced and moved back to Canada. I was only in the US for less than 2 years. I was told by CBP that I have an open case. Things have changed, and I want to get a work visa to go back to the United States. What do I need to do? Now, this is a somewhat complex question here. So, this individual obtained a green card through marriage to a US citizen, and they received a temporary green card. If you're married less than 2 years and you get a green card through marriage to a US citizen, your green card will be limited to a 2 year time period. And this individual got that temporary green card and then left the United States within that 2 year time period and never took action on it. And when they went back to the border, CBP noticed that they still had an active green card. And the problem here is that not only was it active, but it was a temporary 2 year conditional green card. And at the end of this 2 year time period, you're supposed to take action to extend that green card if you want to maintain it. But some people think if they just leave the United States, that the green card will go away. Oh, I got divorced and I moved outside of the US. It's gone. No, it's not. Unless you take action to abandon that green card is still valid and it's in the system. And that's problematic if you want to come back to the United States because you're expected to maintain that green card. Also, it prevents you from getting a work visa in the United States because you can't have a work visa and a green card at the same time. So, what this individual needs to do if they want to return to the United States is they need to take care of that old green card, and they need to notify the US government that they no longer want that green card. And there's a form that you can complete with US Citizenship and Immigration Services, and you can mail that in to give up your green card. Or if you want to take care of it in person, you can actually fill out that form with CBP when you're entering the United States, and you can abandon your green card. So that green card would then go away. And it will always be on record. And that's something to keep in mind. Any interaction with CBP or with US immigration will remain on your permanent immigration record. So although you have given up that green card, it will allow you to then in the future get a work visa and potentially could get a new green card in the future if you can show you requalify. But it will always be on your record that you once had that green card. But just leaving the United States does not get rid of that green card. So keep that in mind if you're in that situation, that there are proper steps to take if you want to properly give up your green card status in the United States. Second question. I'm currently working in the United States on an H-1B visa, and I just started under the most recent H-1B lottery. I now have a job offer and want to know if it would be better to do a TN visa or to remain on an H-1B visa. They want me to start next week, and this position qualifies for both a TN and an H-1B visa. This is an excellent question. So the question really here is which one is faster to get? And should I jump to a TN or should I stay on a H-1B? Well, if somebody wants you to start and you're doing a job change and you're starting in a week, you can't get an H-1B in a 1 week time period. And you're not going to be able to transfer over an H-1B in a 1 week time period with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Even in the most expeditious situation, you're looking at least 3 weeks to 4 weeks before you can get authorizations to change employers on that H-1B. The advantage of an H-1B, if you already have it, is you don't have to wait for it's approved before it's approved to start with a new employer. But you do need confirmation from USCIS through the receipt notice that it was properly filed to enable you to start working for that new employer. And that takes time because you're not only dealing with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, but you're also working with the Department of Labor for a labor condition application, and that just takes time. Whereas a TN, if you wanted to switch employers, you have the right paperwork, you have that support letter, all your proof of qualifications. You can leave the United States immediately, go to a port of entry, reapply, apply at that port of entry, re-enter, and start work immediately. So if it's time that you're concerned about and getting to that job as quick as possible, the TN is going to beat the H-1B every time. And if you want to be on the H-1B long term, but you want to start work right away, well, one strategy is use the TN to get here fast because you can get the paperwork in order and apply quickly, and then switch to an H-1B later after that TN expires. Or if you want to change status to an H-1B while you're in the United States already working for the employer, you can do that as well. So it really depends on your preference, how quickly you want to get to work. If you have to get to work quickly, the TN is going to win every time. All right, final email question is, I have an offer of employment to work in the United States in power distribution, working with steam systems and hydronics as an engineering technician. Would I qualify for a TN visa? Now, this is an excellent question, and there's a lot of confusion out there around who qualifies for TN status, especially when it comes to working in this field, which would fall under a scientific engineering technician technologist, which is one of the occupations under the USMCA. People try to fit themselves in there and try to qualify for a TN because they want to work in the United States. But you got to be careful, even if your title is an engineering technician, that what you're doing qualifies for TN status. And in this case, we're looking at working in power distribution as well as steam systems. And if you go to the regulations and you look up who qualifies for TN status, and here we're going to look specifically at scientific technician technologist. And if you go to our website, we have every occupation broken down with who qualifies and detailed explanations. So if you want to know yourself, if your position qualifies, look it up under the occupations list. And if you're looking up scientific technician technologist, you have to work in one of the delineated fields. One of those happens to be engineering. So if you compare this, engineering technician qualifies. It's on the list, engineering. But you got to dig a little bit deeper. What field are you working in engineering? And this person said that they are working in, again, in hydronics, in steam systems. Well, if you look at the regulations for scientific technician technologist, it explicitly states those who are not admissible as scientific technicians and technologists. It says persons who are intending to do work that is typically done by the construction trades that include welders, boilermakers, carpenters, electricians, etc., even when these trades are specialized to a particular industry, such as aircraft and power distribution, etc. So there are two red flags for this individual. One is they're working in power distribution, and the other is that they are working in hydronics. And if you know what hydronics is, that has to do with hydronics and steam systems. That has to do with boilers and boiler making. So that is explicitly prohibited from obtaining TN status under the USMCA and would not qualify for a TN visa in general. So if you are in the trades, unfortunately, just like in Canada, the United States protects the trades. And it is very difficult, if not impossible, to get a work visa to work in the trades in the United States because of that. And especially a TN visa, under scientific engineering technician technologist, it's explicitly prohibited. All right, now that's it for our email questions for the day. So if you yourself have a question that you would like us to answer on the podcast, you can email them over to us and we'd love to answer those questions live on the podcast. But even better, we would love to have you join live on the podcast and have you answer our questions and address them for you live on the podcast. So if you have questions, please either email them over or let us know that you want to join the podcast. And if your situation is one that we would like to air on the podcast live, then we will take your call live on the podcast. So now that we have addressed those email inquiries, we are going to move to our first live caller of the day. Hello, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us. So you have some questions for me about U.S. immigration.
Yes.
All right, what can I answer for you?
Um, have you seen TN visas approved at the border for 1099 roles versus W-2 roles?
Excellent
And this is
question.
under the pretense where they work under one employer, so they're not working the independent contractor.
Um, so 1099 versus W-2, and can you work in the United States on a 1099 relationship with your employer? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
So the answer to that question is in general, yes. The the agreement that you have with an employer for how you're going to be paid is between you and the employer. And if you choose to receive your wages as a W-2 employee, or if you want to put it in Canadian terms, a T4 employee, then you can do it that way. And if you want a 1099 arrangement, then that's also possible. What is important is who controls you and your work product and who assigns your tasks on a daily basis. Do they have the ability to hire and fire you? Is this, in fact, an employment relationship? If it is, and they are your employer despite being paid 1099, then it still works for TN visa purposes. So you can absolutely work either on a 1099 or a W-2 basis. It's actually not even a part of the filing process with USCIS or even with CBP. They don't go into, hey, are you going to be paid on a 1099 or W-2? And typically in a support letter, we're not going to put that either because it's irrelevant. It's how much are they going to pay you? How long do they need you? And what are you going to be doing? But that arrangement for 1099 or W-2, that's between you and your employer.
Okay. I know a lot of the Border Patrol, if they suspect that it's independent contractor, they can become suspicious, especially when they hear the words 1099. Is there exact phrasing that you should use or like wording on your TN visa letter just to help avoid that?
Well, first you don't mention W-2 or 1099. That's not a part of a TN application. Okay? It's irrelevant. It's how much are you going to get paid? And the reason there's cause for concern is not that because when they hear 1099 and they assume independent contractor, they think you're going to be self-employed. That's the real issue, is self-employment. It's not 1099 or W-2. It's when they hear that, they assume that you're coming to work independently, meaning self-employed in the United States, which is not allowed. So if you're being self-employed, meaning you're going out, you're in working as and putting yourself out as an individual soliciting services in the United States, you cannot do that on a TN. So you cannot be self-employed. That's their main concern. But general advice, if you're applying for a TN, the conversation at 1099 or W-2 really shouldn't arise. It's not a typical question. It should not be in your paperwork because it's irrelevant. If it does come up, then you need to be honest and you need to let them know how you are being compensated. But while reiterating that you're not self-employed and that this is your employer and that's the pay arrangement that you've made. It's so you want to make it clear that you're not going to be self-employed.
I currently work as a nurse and I'm currently on like a W-2 job as on a TN visa in the United States. So this will be the first 1099 that I look at. So I'm familiar with, a salary job, or I worked as a travel nurse at one point that was contract. With this 1099 job, it's remote, but it is under an employer. So like it's not me independent contracting. However, the way that they pay, it's an educator role. So depending on how many like patients or clients that I'm educating monthly, my pay is going to vary. So how would we explain that to the border?
Is there
Or
a
how would
rate
that
that you're
fit in for
paid
my
per
being?
engagement?
Um, it just depends on the like volume of patients that I see.
So explain that to me. So volume of patients, are you paid per hour? Are you paid per patient? Are you paid per week, per month? What does that look like?
It'll be paid twice a month, and it's a percentage of like the volume of patients that we see and educate. Since it's out like not in a hospital role, patients will be coming to see us to require and will need education, so they'll be paying us a rate.
Okay, and you don't know what the rate is?
No.
So the rule of thumb when you're applying for a visa is they want your wage listed. And it has to be a wage that they can determine. Okay. So either per hour, per week, per month, per engagement, it has to be listed in those terms. If you're listing it as a pure commission, that's not going to work. Okay. So you need to determine what is the average amount that you're going to be making per week, per month, per hour, whatever that is, and then that needs to be quantified in your support materials. Okay, um, so making sure that that's positioned properly is going to be very important in if you're applying for a TN to make sure that your wage or compensation is reflected accurately in that paperwork. Because if it's strictly a commission basis, then the border is not going to approve that.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, I know it's not commission based. It just depends on the amount of patients that we see. Because some months, we might not have as many people needing the education.
It's based on volume.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you should be able to quantify that some way, and that's what I would try to do is how can you quantify that and put that in a dollar amount, okay? And whether that's a dollar amount per hour or per week, in that situation, I would try to quantify it probably in a per hour basis is probably going to be the best way to quantify it. And if you can drill that down somehow to a quantifiable dollar per hour, that's probably going to be the best way to position it.
Okay. What are the most common mistakes that you see nurses make that cause the TN denials, or I guess anyone applying?
So we represent a lot of nurses, so we deal with nurses all the time. And nurses in general have a pretty smooth TN application process as long as they have the right paperwork. And I'm always going to add that as long as you have the right paperwork. So as long as everything is detailed properly in the support letter, and that support letter lists your duties and they're clear that those duties fall under the RN profession, your duration of employment, how you're going to be compensated. Um, and then on top of that, to qualify for a nurse under a TN, not only do you have to have the proper education, but you also have to get what is called a visa screen. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I'm currently working as a nurse already in the States. I have it my visa screen through CGFNS.
Perfect. And that's something that's often overlooked is the need for that visa screen. And the important thing about the visa screen is it's required for a foreign worker, whether or not you went to school in the United States. And some people miss that and they assume, oh, I went to school in the US, so I don't need that visa screen. Yes, you do. If you are a foreign worker, the visa screen is required no matter what. And nursing is one of the professions that requires that visa screen. So making sure you have the proper paperwork in order, also having originals. So the border can request original documentation, proof of your qualifications. And the support letter, make sure that that support letter has all the necessary details on it, that it's printed on official US company letterhead, and that, and this is something that people often miss in today's digital world, that it was wet ink signed. Okay. It has to have a wet ink signature on it. It cannot be Adobe sign or a digital signature. Now, in terms of the support letter, you can carry a copy of it as long as it was wet ink signed and then either scanned over or however you received it, but it has to have been wet ink signed at one point.
Oh yeah, I know. I usually get my employer to mail it out to me to avoid any trouble.
Yes, that's the safest.
I know
And
they get a little fickle about copies sometimes.
yep. And if they question a copy, they can refuse you on it. So what you just said, that's the safest approach. If you can get them to send you that original wet ink signed letter, that's going to be your safest. And carry those your original licenses, your degrees, and all of that documentation with you in case they question it. And if you have all of those things with you and they're properly drafted as an RN, uh, then typically you're going to have a smooth process at a port of entry. What port of entry are you applying through?
Peace Arch by
Okay.
Vancouver.
Yep. Yeah, so as long as you have those documents in order, I think that's the number one thing that gets people in trouble. They assume this process is straightforward and easy, which it is if you have the right documentation, right? Uh, and instead of using a support letter, they use an offer letter, and an offer letter doesn't meet the criteria that the border officers require as far as all of the detailed information that are necessary for issuing a TN visa. Sounds like you've been through this before, and you are aware of those things. So you should be all set.
What advice would you give to an employer who has never written one of the support letters before?
If they've never done one before, I'd say don't do it on your own the first time. Absolutely. Have somebody who knows what they're doing draft that. Have somebody who's experienced with TN visas draft it for you. Um, and make sure that it is being done properly. And at that point, if you're comfortable with the process, then, in a lot of cases, you could move forward and do the rest of them on your own, which even then I would caution against because every situation is unique, right? Um, and every individual application has to be looked at under that lens. So, absolutely, if it's your first time, you've never sponsored anybody before, you don't want to mess around. And this really protects the employee. Um, so I'm saying this to employers, but I'm really saying it to an employee like yourself, because you're the one that's making this application. It's not your employer. And if you go to the border with improper documentation, your employer misses out on somebody working for them. No big deal. They'll just go hire somebody else, right? But for you, the person applying at the port of entry, it creates a permanent record in the system and it's on your record. It's not on your employer's record. So making sure you're properly arming your employees before they go to the border with the documentation that they need. So not only can they come and work for you in the United States, but that also so you're not creating future immigration problems for these potential employees.
Because that would make it harder for me in the future to have my applications approved, correct?
It could, depending on what you presented. And in some cases, if the paperwork is really bad, then it could prevent you from getting a visa, right? Um, so that's something you just need to always keep in mind that if you are seeking entry to the United States at a port of entry, making an application with a border officer, it creates a permanent record that will never go away. It's always going to be in the system for better or worse. And if you are refused or denied, then you're going to have to answer to that. Sometimes it's because the paperwork's off, right? And you go back with the right paperwork and it's a simple fix. But it all depends on the situation. But as an employee, as an applicant yourself, those are the things that you need to be concerned about. Am I being given the proper documentation from my employer? Am I comfortable with what they're giving me? Is it clear that this falls in one of those TN occupations? And are you properly armed with what you need to have a successful application so that the record that you do create is a positive record at the border?
Is there a certain way that they evaluate kind of the employer-employee requirement for TN status, or is there any additional supporting documentation that I can bring?
So there is no real independent verification um, as far as that goes. And by the way, 1099 relationship is very common in the medical field. So not just with RNs, we see it with pharmacists, we see it with dentists. I see it with a lot of medical professionals. They do a 1099 or per diem compensation. So it's very common. Now, as far as verifying the employer-employee relationship, well, that's what the support letter is supposed to do. That's supposed to verify who the U.S. entity is that you'll be working for. It's supposed to verify that it's professional level employment, verify your wage, the time that they need you. It's also important that on that letter, that whoever is signing it or the phone number that you give is available. So if CBP does have questions about the employment, they can call that person to verify. Um, and if it's a large company, if it's a hospital or a known quantity, or they can pull up information on the employer on the internet and verify that this is a legitimate employer, they're typically not going to be concerned about the employer. If it's a small company, a new company, and it's hard to find information on them, then it could cause concern with the border officer if this is a legitimate employment situation. But in most cases, they're going to rely on the support letter and publicly available information. And they also have databases that they use to verify if this employer is legitimate. But are you working for a hospital? Is that who you're working for?
I currently work as a case manager outside of the hospital, but my new employer that I'm gonna pick up a second job, they don't work in a hospital. It's gonna be a fully remote job, but I'll be working from my residence in the United States.
Okay, but this is an employer that's been around. They have multiple employees that they could easily
It's
verify that this is a legitimate company.
it's a newer business, but he does have employees,
They
and
have a
it is under
website.
him. Like he supervises. He gives me my client load. He like gives me like everything.
So he's your employer. So that,
Yes,
yeah, that checks all the boxes for employment, even if you're paid on a 1099 basis. Does he have a website?
yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, typically, if they're going to be able to go online, find the website, there's typically contact information on there, an address. They're going to be able to verify that it's a legitimate U.S. employer.
Okay, that helps because I've been super worried about the 1099 classification. I didn't realize that it was more common.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. Um, Again, many people work under a 1099 on a TN. And I'll just reiterate what I said previously. That's not a part of the interview process typically. And it's not a part of the paperwork, how you're being paid your wage, just that they're controlling you, their employee, and that they're compensating you at a professional rate for your professional services is what they want to do. Really, what they want to see and other visas, like an H-1B, if you're familiar with that, they have what's called a prevailing wage that you have to be paid to make sure that U.S. workers that the U.S. labor market isn't being undercut by lower wages being paid to foreign workers. So you have to get a prevailing wage to support an H-1B application. Whereas for a TN, they do not have a prevailing wage determination requirement. So there is no strict requirement of how much a TN worker has to be paid. But it does say in the regulations that you have to be paid a wage that would be considered acceptable for that occupation in that area of intended employment. And that discretion is really on the border officer to determine if that wage would be consistent using available resources such as the Department of Labor to determine if this wage is consistent. And you got to remember that CBP officers see these types of applications all the time. So they're seeing what nurses are currently getting paid, or travel nurses are currently getting paid. That computer engineers or whatever occupation, they see these applications on a regular basis. So they can tell when a wage comes across the table if that wage is inconsistent with what the market's paying. But as long as it's within that market range that they're used to seeing and that the Department of Labor says, then you're going to be fine as far as compensation and how it's listed.
That makes sense. With the wages, are there any other like top red flags that make the officers pause or deny a TN, or like any like viral, I guess, online information that people see whenever they search up TN visa that they think is correct but is actually wrong?
No, they typically rely on the Department of Labor to determine if a wage is consistent, and that will give them that information. Um, but as long as that wage isn't, there's two things that I typically see border officers use to determine a wage, and that is it has to be somewhere in the middle, right? If it's way too low, so, if the average nurse in your area of intended employment is making $100 an hour and you're showing up at the border, but you're going to get paid $15 an hour, that's a problem. Or the average nurse is making $100 an hour and you're coming in at 300, that's also a problem. Well, one is you're undercutting the US labor market and you're probably not a nurse if you're taking $15 an hour. The other is if you're $300 an hour, you may not be a nurse anymore. You may be educated or trained as a nurse, but now you may be in administration, right? And you're no longer working as a nurse anymore. So they can look at the wage to make assumptions about the position, and they use that in the adjudication process. So you need to make sure it is consistent with what the market would pay.
How much discretion do the officers really have whenever they review everything?
Ultimate discretion. So it's on them. And if they want to refuse or deny you, they have the discretion to do so. But in general, we see CBP officers, they're gonna follow the regulations. They're going to look at the qualifications, and if you fit those qualifications and you can prove it, and they have no other reason to refuse entry, we don't see border officers just refusing entry to people that are otherwise qualified. So, although they do have that discretion, they typically will exercise it in your favor if they're able to. If you fit within those qualifications, then we see them approving people more often than not. And despite popular opinion or what the media might say, CBP officers are human too. They're doing a job. They're they their job is to protect the United States, protect the U.S. labor market, and if they see that you're being honest with them, that your documentation is in order, and that you're coming to legitimately work in the United States, then they're going to approve you for your visa.
If I am applying for a second job and I'm applying for a second visa, and like let's say they're having issues with the second visa for whatever reason, is it possible that that can affect my current visa?
It's always a possibility. Um, and we run into this actually quite often. And this is where discretion from the border officer comes into play a lot. Um, More often than not, unless you give them reason to revoke the other visa for the other employment, and they determine that that other visa is invalid for some reason, they'll typically readmit you under the other valid visa without any changes to that visa, unless something in your interview would give a red flag that maybe you aren't properly employed or no longer working, or that position doesn't qualify for TN status. They could revoke the other one too, if upon refusing a new one. But in most cases, if it's a legitimate employment, you're legitimately qualified, and there's just something off in your paperwork and they can't give you the new one, they're not going to touch the other one.
That's really good to know.
Yeah, they're not.
um, like,
I mean, I think the media gives law enforcement and CBP a bad rap. We need to understand that they have a job to do. Um, and in most cases, we see them doing their job properly. Now, do you have officers that have a bad day? Yeah, just like we all do, right? And sometimes you get them on a bad day. But in general, once you'll notice in the interview process, if you have your paperwork in order, you're respectful of them, you're answering questions, they can tell if you're a truthful, honest person and you're legitimately coming to do something that is allowed in the United States. Then they tend to put their guard down somewhere in that interview process once they see everything's checking out. So just remember that they're enforcement officers and they have a job to do, and that's what they're doing. So it's typically nothing against the applicant. Um, so just keep that in mind and be honest and have the right paperwork. And then typically we see most TN visa applicants having no issues in the process.
Just remembering that they're people too.
Yep. And they have bad days just like us.
I have one more question. If you can give one piece of advice to someone applying for a TN visa tomorrow, whether it's W-2 or a 1099, what would it be?
Make sure you have the right paperwork and make sure that you qualify before you apply. A lot of people assume they qualify without actually having their qualifications reviewed or comparing it against the regulations and assume they qualify. We see this a lot where people maybe have worked in the industry for a long time. Not so much with nurses, because nursing, the profession, right, has regulations and licensure and stuff that govern it. So you don't see it a lot in nursing, but you see it in a lot of other occupations in the IT world, for example, where you can qualify by taking a few courses online or through experience or certificates or whatever it might be. And although you might be the most qualified IT professional in the world and you may be amazing at your job, you do not meet the listed requirements for a TN visa. You do not have that diploma. You do not have that degree that qualifies you. And then you assume you qualify because this is what you've done for 20 years. And then you go to the port of entry and they tell you you don't qualify either because your degrees are not a match or you don't have the right degree. And then that leads to a denial. And that could be completely avoided as long as you seek proper advice and make sure that your credentials are a fit before you go and apply. And as long as your credentials are a match and you have the right paperwork, and I'll reiterate, not an offer letter, but a support letter that's properly drafted, then in most cases, when those things check, you're going to have a successful application.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, any other questions that I can answer for you today?
That's everything for today. I know it's been kind of stressful figuring out the whole 1099, but
Yeah,
this
and
helps so
if
much.
you go online and you Google and you search, there's a lot of confusion out there, especially around that 1099 question. So I want to thank you for joining us today and asking these questions because these are questions that a lot of Canadians have, especially around the TN visa. So thank you for calling in today, and I hope you have a great day and best of luck with everything.
You as well. Thank you so much.
Hello, welcome to the Arrive Podcast.
Hi, good morning.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for joining us today. Looks like you have some U.S. immigration questions for us
I,
about
I do.
working in the United States.
Yes, I do. I'm not sure if I fall into a little bit of a different category just with my education being in the US and being a Canadian citizen. Should I give you a little background about myself?
Yeah, let me know what is your education, what is your background, and what is it that you're trying to do in the U.S.?
So I came to Brooklyn. I did pharmacy school, graduated in May of 2024, and then I used my 1 year OPT that ended in July of 2025. And so then I went back to Canada and re-entered on a tourist visa, so it's 6 months. which is running out right now. And during this last 6 months is when I've actually been looking to get licensed, because I graduated pharmacy school, but the position I had didn't require that I was licensed. So I put that off. So I put that off, and now my I-94 is ending. I have to go back to Canada. I still am not licensed. So I'm going back to Canada. I'm writing my New York State exam here. So I'll have one exam done for New York State. I'm going back to Canada. I'm going to complete studying for my national boards, it's called the NAPLEX. And then once I'm licensed, I'm looking to work. What I was hoping for was part-time work as a pharmacist in New York City. And yeah, I guess what I've looked into so far, I guess I just have a mix of information, and I'm not really sure how to best proceed in looking to sort of get the type of job that I want, and, have it be part-time as opposed to full-time, and if that's possible, or I guess, what the easiest paths are for reentry on a TN, what's, a little bit like wider categories of what's possible as well is basically the questions that I have.
So it sounds like as far as qualifications, you're all set. And you're going to be working in the United States in a pharmacy role, correct? That's what you're going to be doing as a
Yes,
pharmacist?
I'm not licensed yet, but yes.
Okay, but you're working on getting that. And just
Yes.
so you understand and everyone else understands, licensure when it comes to TN visa applications and TN visa qualifications is typically a post-entry requirement. That is something that is enforced state by state in whatever the state regulations are when it comes to licensure. So when you look at the TN, the USMCA and the occupations and the qualifications, a lot of them will say you could have a bachelor's degree or licensure. Okay. So it really depends on the occupation. Pharmacy is one of those. That's regulated by the states, right? As far as licensure goes. And it sounds like you're going through that licensure process.
Yes.
So moving on to what type of employment you can pursue in the United States. As long as you're working under the occupation of a pharmacist, there's nothing that dictates that you have to be working full-time in the United States. It can be part-time employment. Now, what they do look at, however, is are you going to be paid a livable wage in the United States? They would be concerned if you're being paid, under whatever the going rate is for a pharmacist, if you're undercutting, the U.S. labor force by too low of wages. But they would also be concerned if you're not working enough in the United States to support yourself. They want you to be here and be able to support yourself and not to rely on government programs or government assistance. So that's something that they do look into when you're making an application. And, pharmacists are generally well paid, right? So a part-time pharmacist can typically get by. Whereas, somebody who's part-time in another occupation, if that's their only job, may not be making enough to be able to support themselves in the United States. So that's what they're looking at when it comes to compensation and whether it's full-time or part-time. Would it pass that standard? And I think, as a pharmacist, that you would pass that standard. So I don't think that would be an issue.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yep.
So when you're saying that they are looking for that, is that sort of the assessment that happens at the border where I've come with an offer of employment and then they're being like, okay, well, this is a part-time offer, and is that who's assessing that, or is there kind of further examination? Is that the HR of whoever is going to be offering me the job will be like, well, we're not going to offer part-time because it's not going to fulfill that criteria of being livable wage?
So I don't think it's not an HR problem or concern. It should be, right? It should be something they consider when they're making a job offer. They should understand if they're, making an offer to a foreign national that this might have an impact on their ability to employ them. But most don't understand that. So not so much from an HR perspective. Now, the person who's making the decision, typically, if you're a Canadian and you're applying at a port of entry, is going to be the border officer. Or if you're applying at an airport through pre-flight inspection, that's the person who's going
Mm.
to make that determination, and they're going to make it on the spot with the documents that you present to them. So, and there is another option for Canadians where you can file inside the United States with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And if you do it
Hmm.
that way, then U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services is making that determination. Now, if you do apply at the
Understood.
border, which it sounds like you probably would, and in most cases Canadians do, that once it's approved at the border, then you're good to go. Now, can they do a site visit and check up on you in the United States and verify you're working where you're supposed to? Yes, they can do that. Um, but for TN visa purposes, it's really uncommon for them to do that. But it is it's a small possibility they do it. So the checks and balances are really done right there at the port of entry.
Okay, understood. And now, so your office, do you guys offer services that, if I'm saying, hey, I'm coming from Canada, this is where I want to live, this is where I want to work in, like this is the area I want to work in, help? Like, do you guys, because I know you guys are immigrations, like you're not functioning, I guess, as a recruiter, or what is your process in sort of being able to aid me specifically or aid a person in finding TN work or navigating that? Like how, I don't know if that question makes sense, but.
No, it makes complete sense. So
Mhm.
we just do U.S. immigration. So we help with the
Yeah.
visa process and just the visa process. Now, do we work in conjunction with HR teams? Do we work in conjunction with recruiters, employers? Yes, we do. Um, but
Interesting.
we do not help people find employment. We do have a lot of clients of ours that are recruiters in the healthcare industry and other industries who do place people in the United States, and then we help with the visa paperwork and make sure that that's in order.
Mhm.
So that's where we come into play, making sure you have the right paperwork in order to obtain the proper visa that will enable you to assume that employment in the United States.
Okay. Now, I have a bit of like it's a very specific me question that is just about, because I'm leaving the States having written, I have two exams that I have to write in order to get licensed. One is the national boards, and then one is the New York State. It's sort of like a law exam. It's basically understanding pharmacy laws in New York State. So that has to be written in New York State. I'm writing that in New York State, and then I'm leaving. And I'm leaving with probably, like, I don't know if this is the right way to look at it, but I have sort of, I'm going to be leaving like 5 days prior to my 180 days or 6 month tourist visa expiring. Then I'm going to Northern Ontario, Thunder Bay, where I've booked an appointment to write my national boards in Duluth, Minnesota at the end of February. So I have to re-enter.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to be re-entering for 1 day, or like, probably 1 24-hour period. And I have good documentation, good reasoning for going to Duluth, Minnesota, but there's just such a limited amount of time that I've left myself in terms of like only being in the US for like 6 months out of a calendar year, from what I understand. Like, do you think
Yeah.
I'll have an issue crossing the border when they say, oh man, you've already been here for like 175 days, and like now you're crossing for 1 day? And
Yeah.
I'll be crossing at a land border, like driving down in a rental car and.
Mm-hmm. And you will have with you, I guess, your admission to the exam, showing that you're coming down to take the exam, and proof that this is
Mhm.
very temporary and that you're going to be returning after the exam, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's what the border officer is going to be concerned about. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and I'm glad you brought this up around that 180 days, right? How
Mhm.
long can a Canadian stay in the United States, during a calendar year? Well, it's actually per visit. So when you present
Mhm.
yourself at the port of entry, the border officer is going to ask you, and what's your purpose of your entry to the United States? And in most cases, as a Canadian, if you're saying you're just coming as a visitor, they're going to admit you, and they're going to admit you on your Canadian passport, your Nexus card, or whatever it is you're using to enter the United States for a 6 month time period. Unless they have reason to
Hmm.
limit that stay, it's going to be for 6 months. And when you exit the United States and seek to re-enter the United States, the border officer has the discretion to readmit you for another 6 month time period or to limit your stay, depending on your situation.
Mm.
So
Mm.
if you have been here for 6 months, right, and you haven't
Mhm.
gone back to Canada, well, what does that look like? Well, it looks like you're living here, right? Or you've been here for an excessive period of time. So if you come here for 6 months, go to Canada for a day, and try to come back for another 6 months, well, there's a strong possibility that the border officer is going to question what you're doing in the United States. Are you working here? Are you actually residing here? Because you can't do that as a
Mm.
visitor, right? And
Mhm.
then the burden's on you to prove that you're not what's called an intending immigrant, meaning you're not intending to live here permanently. You have a temporary purpose to be here. And as long as you satisfy
Mhm.
that temporary purpose, well, it's the discretion of the officer to readmit you. And in your case,
Okay.
with the facts that you've given me, I think they're likely just to let you back in. They may ask what you were doing here for 6 months, and it sounds like you have a good explanation. You were taking exams, whatever it is that you were doing. You finished your studies and you were just relaxing, whatever it might be, um, and
Mhm.
getting in a position to take employment in you know, to position yourself for employment by passing these exams. And you have one more exam to take, and you just need to go down for the day. Officer's likely just to wave you through.
Okay, that's what I was hoping for because it would be tragic for me if I was like denied entry and then it's like I'd have to forfeit the exam and then reapply in 40 days and all of that. So I just was hoping I
Yeah.
wasn't leaving myself in like kind of a really tight situation, but it sounds like generally it should be pretty okay as long as I show them evidence of what I've been doing.
Temporary purpose, right? Are you coming for a temporary
Temporary
purpose?
purpose.
Yeah. And
Okay.
you definitely don't want to say you're coming to live or work here, right? If they get the impression,
No, as I'm not.
like, and those are huge red flags if you're at the border. Oh, I'm going to work in the US. Oh, you are you? Well, where's your visa,
Yeah,
right? Or I'm going to live. Oh,
right.
really? Why do you think you can live there? Like, show me your immigrant visa that allows you to live there, or your visa that allows you to live there. But if you're showing up in your case and you're saying, hey, I have this exam I have to take, here you go. Here's proof of that exam. I rented a car. I got a hotel. I'm only there for this amount of time, and I'm just going to be going back after the exam. And the border officer can, they're going to read into that and, determine whether or not that intent is in fact temporary. And if it is,
Okay.
majority of the time, they're going to let you in for that temporary purpose.
Understood. Okay, that's great. That's reassuring. I don't know that I have any more questions except for like, how do I get a job or do you know any recruiters? Because I've been looking online anyway. But I don't know if those are necessarily immigration questions per se.
Yeah, that they really
Um,
fall outside of immigration and in pharmacy too. That's a crazy industry in the United States right now. If you're aware of the pharmacy market, you had Rite Aid that closed down, right? I know in,
yes.
in in the Buffalo area where I live, it was actually in the news yesterday. People are complaining because their pharmacies aren't filling their prescriptions or quickly enough, right? Because there's a lack of pharmacies to, fill all these prescriptions because Rite Aid has shut everything down, and now the burden is on, here we have Wegmans that does it and other places, but
Uh,
then you just have Walgreens left, right? So there's a big need that's not being met. So I would think because of that you should be able to find a job because there's definitely a shortage. That's for sure.
yeah, and it's interesting because like I was pursuing things with CVS, which they have a really big program for foreign pharmacists, but they tend to look at foreign pharmacists that need to do like an integration period into the US where it's usually like 1 year where you're interning. But because I was educated in the US, I kind of fall outside of that because
Um,
all of my credit, like all of my accreditation is American, whereas like I would probably have to do something like that in Canada, even though I'm Canadian national. Um, yeah, it's a bit of a,
So here's some food for thought,
it's just,
though. So once you have
mhm,
all this licensure, right,
mhm.
that the national boards and the New York State licensure, would you be able to work self-employed?
Like could I found a pharmacy in a sense or
Yeah. So, I mean, that might be a
yeah.
long shot, but if you wanted to start a pharmacy or purchase a pharmacy or join a pharmacy practice in the United States, as an investor, they do have an investor visa that you see professionals
Oh,
often use to do work in the US. I see dentists do it a lot, accountants and lawyers, other professionals. They might buy into a
that's
practice and then become a
extremely
majority
interesting.
owner in it. And then that would potentially qualify for what's called an E2 investor visa. And then you can help run your own pharmacy.
That is really interesting. That's something I didn't know of, but I will look into that.
Or if you do work in the
Yes,
United States
thanks
for a
for that.
period of time and you don't want to work for the pharmacy anymore, then that is something you could potentially move towards in the future if you want to
Right,
go out for business yourself.
right. Wow. Okay, that's something to look into. I was also looking at like PhDs or like PhD programs in pharmacy that sort of then would like lean towards a green card long term.
Yep.
Um, oh, I had one other question. I it I lost it. It was an immigration question about, no, forgot it. Sorry.
Well, maybe it'll pop back up. But yeah, that's another option too, is if you want to go into academia, right? Because you would
Mm-hmm.
qualify for TN as a professor or teacher at a college or university. It qualifies, but potentially with for an H-1B. And yeah, you're right. If you go into that field, um, then often you can get permanent sponsorship that could lead toward a green card or permanent residence in the US too. So
And you would definitely have to move towards a field that, yeah, like I know more like software engineers or people more in engineering from that have finished PhDs that have ended up with sponsorship. It seems like that's can you tell me a little bit about like what sponsorship looks like? Like that, there's very specific criteria that have to be filled by the job, and they essentially can't source that in the U.S. and
yeah,
then are allowed to sponsor.
yeah, in the end, you have to do what's called the employer would have to do what's called a test of the labor market, is what they call it, and work with the Department of
Hmm.
Labor and do certain forms of advertising to show that they've tried to hire U.S. workers to fill this job and they can't find any willing, able, and qualified U.S. workers for the position. And because they can't, well, they found a foreign worker, you, that does meet that criteria, and they want to offer a permanent role to you, then that opens them
Hmm.
up to be then able to sponsor you for what's called an immigrant visa. TN is what's called non-immigrant. It's just temporary for working. An immigrant visa actually leads to a green card. So it allows them to then support you in the process to get you a green card if they can prove that.
Okay, right. And then so a TN is like non-immigrant intent, but that can be renewed. Like I've heard like somewhat indefinitely, but there could come a point where they're like, oh, hey, you've been working on a TN now for like 15 years. What's going on?
Yeah, it is indefinite as long as you don't express intent to reside here permanently. I've seen people on TNs 20 plus years. So,
Interesting.
as long as you maintain that temporary intent, and temporary intent is fairly easy to demonstrate. And, don't say, "Hey, I'm coming to move here permanently." No, you're just coming here for this job. At the end of that job, you'll see what happens, right? If you get another contract,
Right.
well, then you may work for another 3 years. If not, then you'll go back to Canada. But it's your intention when the employment situation ends in the United States that you're going to be returning to Canada. That's the important thing that the border wants to understand. That you're not entering for purposes of residing here permanently.
Okay, understood. So as far as you know, basically I get licensed in New York State as a pharmacist. I can apply to, any jobs that I come across that are, say, if I'm sticking to this, I kind of want to come in on a part-time job. And so I'm applying as a New York State licensed pharmacist. Is there anything legally that I have to disclose that's saying, hey, by the way, I'm a Canadian national, and in order
Are you talking
for me to
about when
take
you're
this,
making, yeah, you're talking about when you're applying for a job?
yeah, like, is there a need for me to disclose? And sometimes certain job applications will be like, do you require sponsorship? And I don't know how to answer that because in some sense I think yes, and in some sense I think no. Like I require a visa, but not necessarily sponsorship. Is that correct?
So it is sponsorship. Now, what you
Okay, it
need
is
to help him,
sponsorship.
yeah, it is. Now, is it the same level of sponsorship as a green card, like we were discussing? No, it's not. And that's where
Mhm.
employers get scared because they think when they're trying to employ you on a TN, it's just like an H-1B or the green card process
Mhm.
that you mentioned, where you have to work with the Department of Labor and you have to get also approval with USCIS, and it's a much more complicated process where you have to get all these other agencies to prove before you can come to work in the US. Whereas with a TN, as long as you have the right credentials and you have the proper support letter, you can show up at a port of entry and you make the application yourself, right? You are the applicant and
Right.
you apply in person and you're admitted right there on the spot to work and live in the United States with that simple paperwork as long as it's done correctly. So the sponsorship level is very low when it comes to immigration and regulations as far as Department of Labor, USCIS. So it's a much simpler process, but employers often don't understand that. They think it's a
That's what I've
complicated
had
process.
trouble with. Mm.
Yeah, so
That
if
that
you
is
can you
exactly what
talk
I've
to a
come up against.
human, yeah, if you can get through that initial screening and talk to a human and explain, hey, look, I'm Canadian. It's not that complicated for me. This is all I need. Then oftentimes they're willing to then help you with the process. But it's getting through the gatekeeper and helping them understand that, which can be difficult because I know what you're up against. You're filling out that job
Mm.
application that says, are you authorized to work in the United States? Well, you have to click no if you're going to be honest, because you're not authorized. You won't be authorized until you get the TN. So yeah, that can be a
That can
difficult
be
gate to get
true.
through.
It is. It's tricky. So I think that that's the biggest hurdle that I've come across up until now when speaking to people because it's like, oh yeah, so a part of me is just trying to find pathways where I can just apply where that question comes like later, where I'm already like have contact with the person. Also, it's like if I am just applying for jobs and they're like, yeah, sure, we want to hire you. Um, what do I require? Like what needs to be included on the letter that I show the border that would be different than say just a job offer to an American citizen where it's like we'd like to hire you, blah blah blah.
Yeah, so it's very different, right? A job offer letter is for
Okay.
HR purposes, and that's just to detail, hey, we want to hire you as a pharmacist. We're going to pay you, $200,000 a year, right? And you're going to get these
Hmm.
benefits. Well, that's just an internal document for employment purposes. Whereas what you present at the border is much different. The letter you present at the
Hmm.
border is addressed to the border. It lets the border know what occupation you're applying to.
Aha.
It details your duties. It has to indicate a visa time period. So, how long do you need this visa for? How much are they going to pay you to perform this work? And where are you going to be working and who you're going to be working for? All of those details are in what we refer to as a support letter, which would
Hmm.
be used in lieu of that offer letter because offer letters are not written properly for immigration purposes. So, yeah, it's important that you have a properly written support letter before you apply and you don't rely on just a standard offer letter from your employer.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. So I guess it's sort of like finding a company that is either familiar with having pharmacists come in on TN or
Yep. Have
finding
you have
somebody
you
open
employed a
enough to like
Canadian
be
before?
educated.
And
Right.
a lot of the problem comes down to if you're working with a big corporation, they have standard onboarding procedures, right? And it's really
Yeah.
hard
Yeah.
to talk to a person when you're doing that. So, in my experience, you're going to have better luck working for smaller organizations who don't have that automated interview process that you have to jump through those hoops before you even get a human, right? Or
Interesting. Okay.
somehow finding a human before you apply and asking these questions. Hey, this is my situation. What do I do? Right. And then when people do understand, especially a smaller organization, they're more willing to work with you when they find out the situation.
Right. Okay. Okay, that is food for thought, which is why, yeah, I really would like to align myself with like with some kind of recruiter that maybe is familiar with New York City area because it is.
Yeah, I
I
don't
think
know
I've
any
just
recruiters that deal just with pharmacists, though. I know recruiters
understood.
that do nursing and medical professions,
Hmm.
but not pharmacy. I'm not aware of any pharmacy recruiters, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That's a lot of really good information. I
Yeah, I'm glad
appreciate
I could answer
that.
your questions for you. You know, I appreciate you calling in and asking these questions to us. So, best of luck with everything that you do, okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you have a great day.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you for tuning in today to the Arrive podcast. And a special thank you to our live guests who joined in and those who did email us questions. We appreciate it. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. Um, and if you yourself see yourself in a situation that you might be living or working in the United States and you have U.S. immigration related questions, we would love to have you on the Ride podcast. So reach out to us, send us your email questions, and hey, we would love to have you as a live guest. So contact us directly if you'd like to join us live. And if you found this content helpful, as always, be sure to subscribe to the Arrive podcast. Share it with your friends, your family, your colleagues, your employers, or anyone out there that you think would find this content helpful. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Arrive podcast.